Hey y'all, today I want to talk about perhaps the most underrated part of Skyrim in the rest of the Elder Scrolls games. The books. Yes, the books. Those rectangular shaped things you pick up sometimes that give you a boost in skill. Most people, including myself, will just pass over these books because we want to play a game, not read some offshoot fanfic. However, these books are more important to the Elder Scrolls universe than just being skill checks. They just might be the most important part of the games, because without them, I can't imagine how any of the vast lore would be in these games. Not to mention any of the mechanics still around from the previous games. Now, if you've never played an Elder Scrolls game, which, let's be honest, if you haven't bought Skyrim at least 3 times, then how can you call yourself a gamer? To give context to those non-gamers, in the Elder Scrolls games, you can find books littered throughout the world. Each book you come across has a chance to be a skill book or a lore book. Some books are special, like Uncommon Tastes, which is a cookbook, and the Lusty Argonian Maid, which is not Christian enough to talk about on YouTube. No, I won't include the spell books because they have no context to the lore in the games. Then there are letters, journals, and recipes, totaling to a whopping 820 readable objects you can find in Skyrim alone. However, I will only be focusing on the lore and skill books in the games, which makes up about 398 of those readable objects. Skill books are the easiest to talk about because they inherently have a gameplay mechanic that goes along with them. When you find a skill book, you have a chance to level up one of the skills depending on what the book is. This only works once per book, and there are 5 books for each skill. My advice in the games would be to just read every book you see because I can never remember the names of each book. But why are these so important to the game? To do this, I want to look at another property Bethesda owns, Fallout. If you ever played Fallout 3, New Vegas, and 4, you would see a clear difference in the way leveling up is done. Fallout 3, you start the game with your special attributes, which give your character distinct advantages and disadvantages. Every level you get skill points to raise skills until they max out at 100. You also get a perk every level that adds something useful or wacky to your character. In Fallout New Vegas, the leveling is much the same, except you get a perk every 2 levels, making them more scarce to have. Let's look at Fallout 4, which arguably has one of the worst RPG leveling systems ever. You get the special attributes like you would in the others, but the skills are completely gone. Instead, those special attributes can be either increased every level, or you can get perks that are only unlocked by how much you have in that special attribute. While I might do a video on Fallout 4 someday, the point of this is not to talk about Fallout, but to compare it to the game design in the Elder Scrolls. I recently played Daggerfall, Morrowind, and I am currently going through Oblivion. There are many changes between each game, which, depending on what you define as an RPG experience, can be either good or bad. However, one constant has remained almost the same between the games: the skills. Every game you level up a skill by using it. Going to a trainer, or of course reading a skill book, except Daggerfall. I would argue that the focus on leveling up in each game has remained the same, because there are objects that work as checks in the game mechanics. One of these objects is the skill book. Unlike other mechanics, such as repair hammers, the books incentivize Bethesda's primary goal: money! No, I mean exploration. I would argue, because the skill book works as both a leveling system and collectibles, the skill system has remained much the same, unlike Fallout, where the leveling system is completely isolated from exploration. This just leaves Fallout's mechanics to be somewhat subpar and always changing, unlike how Skyrim can always have the same mechanics that it's always had since, I guess, Daggerfall, yeah. The lore books are just as important to the games as the skill books are, but in a much different way. The Elder Scrolls games have thousands of years of lore, built up over the course of 2 decades. From gods to mad kings to lusty Argonian maids, of course. There is a lot to enjoy once you dive in. This is perhaps one of the smartest decisions Bethesda made in their early days. I want you to imagine what would have happened if Bethesda decided not to have books scattered across their worlds. What lore and intrigue would be there if history was only given through NPC conversations or a collectible info dump? These lore books are so important to the games because they have expanded the world of Elder Scrolls into the realms of other fantasy lands like The Witcher, Lord of the Rings, and Game of Thrones. While gameplay is very important, the lore that comes from these books gives so much more intrigue to those who are deep Elder Scrolls nerds. The lore books also serve another purpose. That is less to do with the fictional world and more to do with the company. I'll admit, the biggest strength Bethesda has is their ability to make interesting worlds. Fallout 4 might not be a good RPG by like a long mile, but the Commonwealth was just so interesting to explore, unlike, let's say, Fallout New Vegas, which had a bland world. Maybe because of the time constraints or just the company. I mean, look at the Outer Worlds, for example. Every other part of their game design is sluggish, from their clunky mechanics, shallow gameplay, awful textures, and of course the story. I mean, Fallout 3, fine dad. Fallout 4, fine son. Unfortunately, what Fallout suffers from is a lack of world building, like the books in Skyrim. These lore books have become such an integral element to the Elder Scrolls. The stories hold more weight and intrigue. Sure, you might not care about stopping Alduin or helping the Legion in Skyrim, but I bet you will sit and watch 3 hours of the Great War, the disappearance of the dwarves, or the Song of Pelennor. These books have incredible lore to give the games, and while the games do not really live up to these books, it is hard to argue if an Elder Scrolls story could ever be considered really bad with the backbone it has. Which of course worries me for Starfield. Will it fall into the same trap as Fallout? Maybe? I don't know. So, when Todd releases another version of Skyrim or The Elder Scrolls 6, I know you will most likely go about looking at the books and instantly clicking them off to get that level up. But once in a while, do me a favor and appreciate that these books keep the game mechanics alive and the lore grand. Because without them, The Elder Scrolls might very well fall into the traps of Fallout, where the game mechanics are always changing and the story is always bland, no matter what happens. See you all, I guess. Yeah, bye. I don't know really how to end this. I just gotta do a skip-a-dabba-deep-dop.